University of Virginia football history? I'm going to ask that question of a man who can answer that better than anyone, Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe, 40-plus years on the beat, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, and the star of our show here in the house. We're going to talk everything from that monumental victory in Chapel Hill. The only thing missing from that victory was a nationally televised audience. I don't have the luxury of Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe being on press row in Chapel Hill. I listened to the first half on the radio with John Freeman on WINA, and then I said to my wife about, 8 o'clock, 8:15 in the evening, I got to go watch the second half somewhere because we didn't have the CW. So I got in the Family Explorer. Yeah. And went from Keswick to the Lazy Parrot and caught the second half of the Lazy Parrot because I wasn't going to miss the second half, Hootie. And there was like 25, 30 Wahoo fans drinking beer, eating wings, and screaming and cussing and then hooting and hollering and then hugging each other. It was the quintessential Virginia football emotional array of roller coaster ride. We're going to talk about all this when the show starts here in a matter of moments. If you could, guys, give the show a like and a share. Jerry Ratcliffe is ready to rock and roll, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, on the Tuesday edition of the Jerry and Jerry Show. J-Dubs, my friend, he's the director and producer of the program. Judah Wickower, we are ready to rock and roll when you are, sir. Good Tuesday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and this is the Jerry and Jerry Show. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, a couple of miles from Scott Stadium, and the mood and the cheer is positive and bright this chilly Tuesday morning. UVA football gets a monumental victory against UNC in Chapel Hill. What a win for this football team. And if you take a look on screen, you'll see some of the headlines we'll cover today with the star of our program, Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, a man equipped and experienced to answer questions like, is this the greatest road victory in program history? We'll talk Tony Elliott and what this victory does for job security. We'll highlight Superman Mike Hollins and ask the question, does Superman wear number 7? And we'll take a look at Tony Bennett's boys in this Virginia basketball program. ACC Media Day is tomorrow. Judah Wickower, our Elmer's glue behind the scenes, the man who keeps this show and this network together, the director and producer. If we can go to the studio camera and welcome our star, the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe, in Chapel Hill on Saturday evening. My friend, what a victory.
Quite a victory, Jerry, and I don't think hardly anybody saw this one coming at all because I have a guy named Andrew Jones who's publisher of Tar Heel Illustrated, we usually do a podcast before every Virginia-North Carolina football basketball game, and Andrew is a guy who is so honest about things. And even when Virginia, in past years, when Virginia didn't have much of a chance, he would say, well, they could exploit this or that from Carolina and all that. But even he and I talking off air before our podcast the other day he said, I've looked at this from every angle, Hootie, and he said, I honestly can't find one way that Virginia can win this game. And he was being totally honest. I couldn't either, and we finally agreed on the point that if anything got in Carolina's way, it would be Carolina, which turned out to be somewhat prophetic. Mack Brown, I think we talked about it on the show last week. Mack Brown told his players a story he had learned when he was at Texas about don't eat the poison cheese. And he did end up hanging little pieces of cheese on every locker that week to remind them that you're probably not as good as your clippings. So, take Virginia seriously. Don't let yourself drop your guard. And some of that occurred. He came out yesterday and and fell on the sword and took the blame for the loss, but for not having his team ready. But you look back upon it, and it wasn't because he didn't warn them. That's for sure. They had proper warning that, hey, you could get upset if you're not careful, and they didn't listen.
They didn't listen. Mike Collins, we'll start with him. 3 touchdown performance for Superman, who wears number 7. Tony Muskett, 20 of 30. He did have a pick. He did have a touchdown. The offensive line really showed up against UNC. I was very impressed with the offensive line. Let's cut to the chase. Drake May, the gunslinger for UNC, was not his NFL caliber self. He still had a hell of a line. 2 touchdowns, a pick, 347 through the air, but it was the 24 of 48 and the missing of wide open wide receivers that had many watching the game or in person in Chapel Hill asking, what the heck is going on here? First, I'd love to highlight the positives. Do you start in the trenches with the offensive line?
Yeah, and well, I think you actually have to start in the meeting rooms over at the McHugh Center, where the coaches put together a brilliant game plan, really. I think that these guys saw something on film that nobody else has seen this year when they studied North Carolina. You can't tell me that, as well as Virginia's offensive line played, you can't tell me that these guys magically transformed from a team that couldn't block NC State and Boston College to all of a sudden dominating the line of scrimmage against a defense like North Carolina. I know Mack Brown had tried to dispel the notion around college football that his team was soft, and they had done a pretty good job of that. But I think these guys, in their film study, these UVA coaches, I think they found something in there that they could exploit, because Des Kitchens told us after the game that he felt like that Virginia could run on Carolina. And Carolina had only given up 130 yards a game on the ground. Virginia rushed for almost double that in Kenan Stadium when Carolina had everything to win. I mean, people were talking about college football playoffs, about being in the ACC championship game against Florida State. So the fact that Virginia was able to control the line of scrimmage and run the football down Carolina's throats was massive. I thought that was the whole key to the game, because if you can run the ball like that, you can control pretty much everything. And Virginia had the ball a lot longer time of possession than Carolina did, kept Drake May off the field, and did everything they had to do. But kudos to the offensive line, because they did open holes for these guys, and it made a huge difference. They should get a game ball for what they did.
Absolutely. Hootie Ratcliffe dropping dimes here. The time of possession, UVA 37 minutes and 6 seconds. UNC 22 minutes and 54 seconds, dominating time of possession. And Jerry Ratcliffe is exactly right. 54 carries for 228 net yards on the ground for UVA football, $143 on the ground for UNC. Viewers and listeners, you can offer comments, and we will relay them live on air. Let's go to Keswick, Virginia. Stephanie Wells Rhodes, watching the program of the Interstate Service Company family, a Holmes best friend. She says, fellas, my husband swore we were going to win all day Saturday. He said we were due. I wish we would have put some money on it. So proud of our team. Go Wahoos. That's from Keswick, Virginia. Kevin Yancey, he loves to play the bear. There's always a bear in the room.
Right.
He says a blind hog still finds acorns occasionally. He's watching in Waynesboro right now. Rob Craig, you see him from time to time, right there on press row at UVA basketball games. He says, when you consider ranking records, point spread, doesn't this have to be considered the biggest upset, most improbable win in UVA football history? You put the headlines on screen for Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe. That's literally what we talked about in our pre-production meeting. Is this, I got a two-part question for you, and I'm going to echo what Rob Craig said. Is this the greatest road victory in UVA football history? And then I'm going to echo what he said. Is this the biggest upset, most improbable win in UVA history?
Well, probably so, because you consider the circumstances, and even though we're not, it's going to be interesting to see how this season pans out, whether Carolina continues to win and ends up doing everything that they wanted to do, or if they just kind of become another mediocre Mack Brown football team. That's yet to be determined. And so that could take that could tarnish some of what Virginia accomplished. But in today's perspective, as we speak, in real time, it was massive. Since they've been keeping polls, there's been nothing like this in Virginia history. It's the first time they've beaten a top 10 team on the road ever. Again, since they started polls, in my study and research to write the Virginia history football book, there were two massive upset wins back in the day. One, they beat Penn in Philadelphia back, I think it was in the 40s. And it was a massive upset because Virginia had never beaten Penn. Back in those days, the first 50, 60, 70 years of college football, the Ivies were essentially considered, the SEC of college football back in those days, along with Notre Dame and Army and Navy. But that was a massive win. I think talking to some Virginia players who were part of that, I think that was during the Art Gep era. Virginia fans and Virginia players tore up the team hotel in Philadelphia so bad they were told to never come back again in their wild celebration. So that was quite a win. And believe it or not, back in the, I guess it was the late 80s when Virginia was celebrating their 100th year of football, I was fortunate enough to interview the oldest living Cavalier at the time. He was in his late 90s, I believe, and I'm trying to remember his name. They named a building after him over at the hospital. Claude, it'll probably come to me later. He played on the 15 team, believe it or not, that went to Yale in the Yale Bowl. Again, that was like beating Alabama on the road in those days.
Was it Claude Moore?
Claude Moore.
Google search right there.
Dr. Claude Moore.
Okay.
I interviewed him in his hospital bed over, I think, at Blue Ridge. And he'd become, I think, a billionaire. He bought all the land that Dulles Airport sits on now, all that property up in Northern Virginia. But he was an offensive lineman, I believe, on that 1915 team, and they stunned Yale on the road. And he was telling me about that game. So those were two road wins that shouldn't be forgotten. But in modern times, again, since they started doing polls, I think sometime in the late 40s or maybe early 50s, I can't recall, but there's no question this was the biggest road win without a doubt. And, they had their chances back, I guess in 95, George Welsh's team, when they should have beaten Texas on the road, they got shafted by the officials, I think, from the Southwest Conference because there was at least one field goal that should have been called good. Those officials waved off as bad, and there were some other questionable calls in that game. It's the only time in my career I've really thought that game officials were cheating for the home team, and I think that might have been the last year of the Southwest Conference, so they had nothing to lose. And then that same year they opened up the season at Michigan and lost on essentially the last play of the game, with that tightrope catch in the end zone that beat them at the Big House. So they had opportunities in the past, but something always prevented it. But they made it when James Jackson stepped up and intercepted that lame duck pass after Paula Carey had hammered Drake May, forced a bad throw. They didn't leave any doubt. A massive win considering they were 24 point underdogs, playing on the road at a place where they haven't won a lot over the years.
Was 1-5?
Yeah, we're 1-5 on the season.
Only victory, William and Mary.
A lot of people were expecting 1-11 out of this team, if that much. And Mack Brown, Hall of Fame coach. He has a Heisman quarterback.
A pro wide receiver.
At least one, maybe two. Really good running game. Defense better. These guys were looking to play, go on to run the table and possibly win the ACC championship game. And they still could do that. And make the college football playoffs. So they had everything in the world going in their favor. And for Virginia to march into that stadium and come out with a win was just mind-boggling, shocking. I was stunned. And I've seen a lot of things that have surprised me with this program over the years and football in general. But that was stunning, to say the least. That's underplaying it. It was stunning.
Fantastic take from the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer. We'll highlight some of the viewers and listeners watching. James Watson, hello. He's a UVA graduate. Vanessa Parkhill, who loves Penn State. She's watching in Earlysville. She loves college football. Kate Sharts, Sarah Hill-Puchensky, John Snow, Bernard James, Kevin Higgins, Lonnie Murray, Carol Thorpe, Heather Walker in Johnson Village. Woody Fincham, hello. Dr. John Shabe, owner of Pro Renata, hello, and welcome to the program. Dr. Downey, welcome to the program. Viewers and listeners, you can shape the conversation. Big Ray watching the program. And the Cool Cats. Neil Williamson, hello and welcome to the program. Ask questions. Shape the conversation by putting your thoughts in the feed. Your Twitter account is on fire right now. I'm going to throw this to you here. The only thing this game was missing was the nationally televised coverage. It had drama. It had scoring. It had touchdowns. Good night. Mike Collins' fumble late in the game had everyone on the edge of the seats saying, here we go again. Mm-hmm. It had fantastic coaching from Tony Elliott. It had adjustments. It had time of possession in UVA's favor. Tony Muskett, he played a pretty good ball game, yes. All things considering. That pick concerning in the end zone, but a pretty good ball game, all things considering. He's on the road in Chapel Hill against UNC, right? It had everything here. These are what I woke up after this game to direct messages, text messages, emails for you specifically. Does this victory secure Tony Elliott's future in Charlottesville for another year as head coach of Virginia football?
Well, it's difficult to say that. I think it probably does. I really don't think he was going to lose his job this year anyway. No matter what happened at the end. Now, if they had gone 1-11 and gotten blown out and weren't competitive, the big donors became restless, weren't convinced that he could get the job done, etc. That might have put a different light on things. But, if they – I felt like he was most likely going to get yet another year just because he signed a 5 or 6 year contract to start with, has like a $19 million buyout, something like that. I don't know if Virginia wants to pay that kind of money to somebody, but all that's not really relevant because I don't think it's going to have any. I don't think it's going to play out like that. I never did really. I thought Virginia would win 2 or 3 games, and the fact that they beat North Carolina now, if you can beat North Carolina on the road, you can beat anybody else that's remaining on your schedule. Miami and Louisville and Duke, I think Duke comes here. Miami and Louisville are on the road. At
Louisville.
Yeah, those two are on the road, and they won't be easy games because Miami just beat Clemson. Louisville has been up and down. They beat Notre Dame at home. Duke here will be an interesting game because Duke's pretty darn good, and then you got Georgia Tech here and Virginia Tech here. So the schedule, in some ways, is kind to Virginia, and you got some winnable home games for sure. But I really didn't think he was going to lose his job anyways, but I think this really puts a cap on it because, it showed some of the doubters. And I had a lot of people on my Twitter who have been calling for Tony's head since early on.
Eat some crow?
They willingly ate some crow. And so I think if that's the attitude of some of his harshest critics, then the other people who were sort of on the fence or believing, as many of them have said on this program, that give the guy time to get his recruits and things like that, I think things are weighing heavily in his favor now in terms of giving hope. And that's all a fan base needs, I think, is hope that they can be competitive week after week. And this, I would think this would furnish plenty of hope for the rest of this season and down the road. If he can go on and win a couple more games, win 4 or 5 games, which virtually no one expected, I don't think. I'm sure there's some of the most diehards out there.
I mean, the over-under was what, 3.5 at the beginning of the year for victories?
Yeah, 3.5. So if he can win 4 or 5, that gives you a lot of promise that, hey, maybe he can turn this thing around.
The schedule closes like this. On Saturday, you got Miami in South Florida on the ACC network, 3:30 kickoff. Virginia then hosts Georgia Tech in Scott Stadium, 2 o'clock kickoff here in Charlottesville. Travel to Louisville on a Thursday night contest. ESPN's going to offer a national televised audience. Louisville, 7:30 kick. You follow that with Duke the following Saturday in Charlottesville, and you close with the Hokies on the 25th of November. So you close the year with Miami, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Duke, and Virginia Tech. There are winnable ball games on this schedule. Virginia Tech looks very human.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia Tech, you would say, is a winnable ball game.
And Georgia Tech, I don't think, has won here since 1990.
Georgia Tech, very winnable. Miami, Louisville, and Duke will be some stiff competition. Of those 3, would you call the Cardinals the most likely opportunity for a win?
I'm not sure because you got Duke here. And even though Duke has played pretty well, they've lost a couple. They'll probably lose at least another game before they get here, maybe 2, because they don't have an easy schedule either. I think they have to play.
I got it right here. Duke's schedule, Hootie's exactly right. Duke has got a difficult schedule to close, and they just lost a tough ball game in Tallahassee to Florida State. Florida State looks like the real deal, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Duke at Louisville, Hootie. Hosts Wake Forest, at UNC, at UVA, close with Pitt.
Yeah, so they could be susceptible to another loss or 2 before they get here, and who knows how that might impact them. And even though Virginia lost a lopsided game to Duke last year, I believe, the games here in Virginia. If Virginia can beat Carolina on the road, certainly they can beat Duke here. I'm not saying that they will, but they certainly can't discount that. Louisville's been a tough place to play for Virginia. People don't realize because they're kind of Louisville's so far, 7 hours, 8 hours to our west. You really don't hear that much about them. They have an incredibly great stadium out there that they've built and added on to. They have an electric fan base when they're winning. That's a very daunting place to play, and they have some talent. They have a really good coaching staff in there. So it's going out on the road to Louisville and winning it is certainly not going to be easy.
The Miami game, a 3:30 kickoff. I'm looking at the line now. The Wahoos, an 18.5-point underdog, depending on where you shop. The over-under at 47.5. So UVA is an 18.5-point underdog. Interestingly, UVA and Miami have the same ACC record right now at 1-2. Now the overall record is inverted. The Hurricanes are 5-2. UVA is 2-5. This is going to be on the ACC network with the 3:30 kickoff on Saturday. I want to ask you 5 keys to victory that you saw with UVA football against UNC and how some of these keys may be able to scale to Miami.
Yeah, well, I think one of those was the game planning. The coaches used that bye week not only to get healthy, but they did a lot of self-scouting, evaluated what they were doing, threw some bad things out, put some new things in, and I thought had an incredible game plan for North Carolina. So I thought that was one of the places they won the game was before they even left town. 2 was an incredible running game. Again, they controlled the line of scrimmage. They controlled the clock. They were able to move the chains, and that's something that's been missing from this program for years. Bronco could never really get a reliable running game throughout an entire season. Mike London struggled to do that from time to time. You almost have to go back to the early Al Grove era when they had big NFL linemen and some pretty good running backs. That's a while. I mean, that's back in the early 2000s.
I was in college then.
Yeah, so a dominating running game, if they can run the ball like that the rest of the year, they have that really increases your odds of being successful if you can do that. 3, the defense played bend, don't break, came up with a turnover or 2 at key times, put some pressure on Drake May, even though he had a phenomenal numbers night. He wasn't an NFL-looking Drake May like we had been.
Right.
Again, you got to give props to the offensive line because they had not been able to get the job done. They certainly did the other night against a defense that has been intimidating to some other teams so far this year. And I think you also have to look at Malik Washington. The guy's been phenomenal. He's had 4 or 5 100-yard games already. That touchdown that iced, well, didn't really ice the win because Carolina still had a chance, but the go-ahead touchdown on the pass from Tony Muskett down near the Carolina goal line, he ran through 4 tacklers to get into the end zone.
Yeah.
And he's not a big guy, Jerry. I was talking to him after a game here. I guess it was the William & Mary game. Maybe it was another game, but
5'8", a $194 list.
Yeah.
I read your game report. He goes, I'm not big.
Exactly.
I got to figure out how to zigzag through these guys.
Yeah, he was laughing. And, I mean, he ran through 4 tackles and made Tony Elliott called it a big boy play, and it certainly was. This guy's in the top 5 of every NCAA statistic in regards to receiving. What a gift he was to come in here from Northwestern, and he's an academic guy too. I mean, he was all academic Big Ten for 3 years, and I'm sure he'll finish out his career at Virginia as all ACC academic. And you got to give some credit to Will Sparks, the punter. He kept Carolina backed up a lot.
Booming kicks.
Yeah, he had 160-some yards. And that was a factor, too. So Virginia was hitting on just about all cylinders in this win, and you couldn't ask for much more if you're Tony Elliott.
I got to throw Malik Washington's numbers to you in comparison with his ACC peers. We just got this question from Matthew, who's watching in Norfolk, Virginia, and he said, ask Hootie if this is the best wide receiver in the Atlantic Coast Conference right now. Statistically, Malik Washington, the Northwestern transfer, is the best wide receiver in the ACC. He's got 56 catches. The second closest from a catch standpoint, you're looking at a kid out of Miami with 54. He's got 56, Malik Washington. 783 yards through the air. The next closest, 639, Thrash from Louisville. He's got 6 touchdown catches. 6 touchdown catches for Malik Washington, ranks second to Keon Coleman in Florida State, who's got 7. He's averaging 14 yards a catch. You can put he's averaging 111 receiving yards per contest. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not saying he's got the best upside or pro talent. I would probably say that would be the Walker kid from UNC who's played 2.5 games. That guy's a machine. That guy is clearly a pro playing college football right now.
No question.
But Malik Washington on paper, Hootie, statistically, we may be looking at the top wide receiver statistically in the Atlantic Coast Conference and a first-team All-ACC performer.
Yeah, and I don't think his numbers are going to drop very much because I guarantee you if Carolina couldn't stop him, it's going to be difficult for anybody else to do so. And he's going to get his targets every game because he finds a way to get open from that slot receiver spot. And he's so good with yards after catch because he runs like a running back. He doesn't run like a wide receiver. So his size may hurt him potentially toward the NFL, but I think he'll get a shot.
Does he have the upside for the slot?
I think he does. Again, there's been guys his size that have made it in the pros. So I think if he's right with the right team, if you can catch the ball and run after the catch,
there's a roster
and
spot
find ways
for
to
you.
get open, and he has really good speed. There's a roster spot for him out there somewhere. Is he the best in the in the ACC? There's probably some other guys like Walker and Florida State, Miami. They bring in talented guys that will end up in the NFL for sure. So I haven't seen some of those guys in person. So it's hard to say that he's the best, and it depends on what your definition of best is. Is he the best college guy right now in the ACC? Maybe. Probably he and Walker and maybe a couple of those other guys, but statistically he's beaten all of them. Potentially in terms of NFL and all that, there's probably some guys ahead of him, but I'm not sure anything's going to slow him down.
Well, I will say this. Malik Washington showed up and really shined at an opportune time because there were a boatload of NFL scouts at that UNC game.
Yep.
A boatload. He was targeted 15 times, Malik Washington, against the Tar Heels. 12 catches, $115 through the air, 115 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. To put that in perspective, Mr. Walker, the UNC standout who's played 2.5 games, I mean, I'm not even sure he 100% knows the playbook yet.
Probably not.
Okay,
yeah.
like legitimately this guy's played 2.5 games. He was targeted 16 times. He had 11 catches, $146 in receiving yards, and a touchdown. These guys are very, very good pass catchers. I love a take from you on Tony Muskett. I'll give you his line again. He did have a really bad pick in the end zone. Not a good read on that particular play. He finishes 20 of 30, 208 in the air, a touchdown, a pick, and Tony Muskett showed some athleticism outside the pocket carrying the football.
Yeah, he ran it 12 times for 66 yards and picked up some valuable real estate down there in Kenan Stadium. But I thought all along that if Muskett he didn't have to be a star. He didn't have to be a Drake May for this football team. He just had to be a serviceable guy who could put up some consistent numbers and not beat himself. And that's pretty much what he did the other night.
He's managed the game.
He just managed the game. He's got playmakers, and he knows that. He's the first guy who says, I want to be the point guard of this football team and get the ball into the hands of the people, my playmakers. And he's done a good job of that. He was 20 of 30 the other night, and those are pretty decent numbers, especially
on the road.
And again, even though he's playing in pain, will probably have to have shoulder surgery at the end of the season. He's not reluctant to take off and run for first downs or get needed yardage or pick up some yards to avoid a sack. When your quarterback runs it 12 times and he's not known as a Bryce Perkins kind of runner, or even a Brendan Armstrong kind of runner.
That's just icing and gravy.
That's a big bonus to have your quarterback, especially one with shoulder pain, giving it up for his teammates.
I'll throw this, and anyone who watches this program knows I'm a huge Anthony Calandria fan. He's the first-year quarterback from Florida. He filled in for Muskett admirably for a handful of games. He's got a lot of upside. I think he's the future quarterback, we hope, of this program. He stays on the team, doesn't transfer the program. My fingers are crossed there. In the first year, with Calandria being a freshman and Muskett having college football experience, you see why the coaching staff may trust a Muskett a little bit more now. He takes less chances. He understands the concept of managing the game, of distributing the football, and keeping his team in the contest. A lot of Calandria this season, while he has more upside, more potential than Muskett, he has a greater affinity for mistakes and a much larger appetite for risk than Muskett.
It's a bigger learning curve for him. And like you said, the games he did have to start and play, he put up some great numbers, but it was all a learning experience for him. I think from everything I understand, he and his family realize what Tony Elliott's plan is for him and are okay with it, at least for now. And I think he realizes that he does have a bright future here, and he's willing to sit and learn. And I'm sure everybody's keeping their fingers crossed that Muskett doesn't get hurt so they don't have to burn that red shirt year, because he can't play in another game otherwise. But yeah, Tony Muskett, he's a very confident kid. He's a guy of strong faith. He is very inspirational to his teammates, and they rally around this guy. They see that he's putting everything on the line for them, risking personal injury to get a first down. And that, you know, if you're in the huddle with that guy or in the locker room with that guy, he has earned your ultimate respect, because he can make plays, and the fact that he is willing to put everything on the line to win. And this kid loves Virginia. He grew up in Northern Virginia. I think he would have liked to have come here originally, but was overlooked in the recruiting process. But the fact that he got a chance to come here and is gung-ho wahoo, you have to give him the ultimate respect.
Well said. Well said. Kevin Higgins, watching the program in Greenwood, he says it's not the numbers of We Are Marshall, but it is We Are UVA, and that win was remarkable. Kevin Higgins also says Tony Elliott has a group of men that believe now. As a coach, you do your best to teach and instill that, but your team has to believe they can beat anyone any day. The Who's lost 3 games by 7 total points, figuring themselves out. That's over with now. We now have a confident team that believe in each other. Think about what Elliott and his team went through last year. George is looking down. Wow, George Walsh is looking down with pride. Kevin Higgins
Those
says.
are all valid points by Kevin there, and George probably is, because George thoroughly enjoyed beating Carolina. He probably not as much as he enjoyed beating Duke, because he and Steve Spurrier had this thing. that carried on forever, even after Spurrier was gone. But George rarely lost to North Carolina. He took that rivalry seriously, and it is the South's oldest rivalry for a reason. And it's a shame that it wasn't on something more available than the CW. They say that's a national network. I guess it is, but not everybody can get it, obviously, because you couldn't get it.
Yeah, and we got a boatload of options.
Yeah, so, it's a shame that this isn't a more publicized. I think we mentioned it last week. We couldn't figure out why it wasn't a more publicized rivalry like Auburn, Alabama.
It's the South's oldest rivalry.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's only two other teams in the nation, two other series in the nation that are longer than this one. That was the 128th, I think, meeting the other day that goes back to 1892, for goodness sakes. Most people didn't even play football back in those days. So
they're getting national recognition. Kirk Herbstreit recognized this as an upset.
They got helmet stickers. I know Tony Elliott was somebody's coach of the week. Des Kitchens was somebody's offensive coordinator of the week. Malik Washington was the East-West Shrine Bowl offensive player of the week. He and Jackson were ACC players of the week at their positions. So they're getting a lot of plaudits around the country for what they pulled off. And that's can only build their confidence going forward.
This is a great question from Michelle, who's watching in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She says, fellas, how can UVA utilize the Malik Washington transfer portal success story to rebuild this program quickly, especially considering the incoming recruiting class is not that highly touted?
Well, that's a good question, and that's something that we've talked about at length on this show in the past. First of all, you got to realize that Malik Washington was a guy at Northwestern, a program that
is known for academics.
It's known for academics.
Yeah.
I mean, he was all academic Big Ten for 3 years in a row. He's a smart kid. He's a very well-spoken kid. Northwestern football team was struggling. They had some scandal within their program that has cost. Still do, and I imagine that quite a few guys left there. He's not your common transfer portal guy.
Right. He's the perfect guy for UVA.
He's perfect for UVA, and maybe Virginia should try to recruit some more Northwestern's players, but. It's difficult, as we've said before, even though there are so many players in a transfer portal. Some of them academically just can't cut it here, and some of them who probably could, some of their credits won't be accepted by UVA. They won't transfer. So that cuts down your pool considerably. And some other guys are looking for NIL, some are not. But the ones who are probably going to look elsewhere because they want a payday. And you're not going to come here and get rich playing football for Virginia, at least through the NIL system, unless something changes here. And that's a question for the future. But I think they probably will put more effort into the transfer portal this time around. I guess it might have been Tony's first experience with that because he was the first-time head coach. Maybe he didn't realize that he needed to lean on that as much as some other coaches do. I don't know how much he was involved with that when he was at Clemson as opposed to Dabo and other people. So I'm sure it's on-the-job training for him too, but that is certainly a way you can fill a lot of holes and rebuild your football team if you can do the proper research and get lucky and recruit the kind of guys that want to come here and play. Again, academics, you can't dismiss that. That's a big part of the process.
Jennifer Ryan watching the program, and she says, boys, you got to talk about Mike Collins. How about 3 touchdowns? And I'll add to that, Jennifer, thank you for offering your perspective on the show. Not just 3 touchdowns, but a guy that really set the tone for Virginia football. And you can tell, and the coaching staff trusts him in the red zone. Now, we all saw the fumble. We all saw the fumble late in the game. The fumble had everyone biting their nails and saying, here we go again. Still, this young man, we know the history, 15 carries, 66 on the ground, 3 touchdowns, a 4.4 yards per carry average. He steps up in the greatest road win, arguably in UVA history, one of the best upsets in UVA history. Very fitting, my friend.
Virginia doesn't win that football game without Mike Hollins.
There it is.
And you made a really good point just a second ago about the UVA coaches trust him, particularly down close to the goal line. He's earned that trust for sure. And, it was, I don't know when it was maybe a couple of weeks ago. Mike Hollins had come over to the George Welsh Indoor Football Facility. That's where we do our player interviews most of the time after practice. And Jim Daves, their media relations director, was there and sometimes coordinates those interviews, and had Mike over there. And he listened in to the interview, and he just made a comment to Mike as he was leaving the facility. He said, "Yeah, it makes me so happy to see that people are talking to you about football and not last November." And he said, "I wondered at some point that would happen, and certainly it should happen now, because this guy has proved that he's a player. 3 touchdowns, could have been 4. Virginia could have won. Virginia could have scored 2 more touchdowns in that game.
Easily.
And nobody felt worse about that fumble, I'm sure, than Mike Hollins did, because he doesn't fumble much. And I tell you, he and the guy that was here for Bronco, Wayne Talapapa, who had a nose for the end zone once he got down close, he was not to be denied. And Mike Hollins is the same way, man. He gets those tough yards between the tackles down on the goal line, and he had some bullish runs where he just runs over people.
Well, Hollins does a good job of getting his pads upfield and making a decision quickly.
Yes.
He's not one of those tailbacks that dances in the backfield and risk a lot of tackles for loss. And in the red zone, and especially when you're trying to control time of possession by moving the chains, having a tailback that makes a cut quickly, makes a decision quickly, and he's not a small guy. I mean, this guy packs a punch.
Yep.
I like his running style, especially how it maybe complements some of the other tailbacks on the roster, and I see why he's a trusted guy at Hootie in the red zone. And I don't think the Fun Bowl is going to dissuade the trust the coaching staff has in Hollins, because this guy is not only playing for his team, he's playing for his fallen brothers.
Yes. He's a north-south runner. He's a one-cut guy. He doesn't, like you said, he doesn't zigzag or try to do anything fancy. He knows where the end zone is. He knows where the first down is, and he goes after it with a fury. And if you're going to stop him, you're going to have to. He's not going to go down easy. He's going to deliver a lick. So he's a tough kid, man. And it's not just physically tough; he's mentally tough. To have come back from what he did, if there's some kind of a national comeback player of the year award,
him.
I know the ACC has one, the Brian Piccolo Award, and it should be him hands down. I can't imagine anybody who has ever gone through anything quite like that before and come back and played, not just played, but played well. And I mean, he's a force out there.
Logan Wells Claylow watching the program. We got viewers and listeners in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, across the Commonwealth, and Maryland, and in Pennsylvania watching the program as we speak right now. If you have any comments, put them in the feed. We'll get to Grace watching the show. She says she's a UVA graduate of 2006, and she wants to talk about Des Kitchings and what he had to say about Tony Elliott following the win. She said Des gave immediate props to Coach Elliott and what he has gone through following the victory, and he should be commended for that.
Yeah, no question about it. Des is a good guy. He's fun to talk to. I talk to him every week. I'll probably miss it tomorrow because I'll be down in Charlotte for the basketball media day. But I'm sure Des is very close to Tony Elliott, them being offensive guys like they are and doing a lot of game plans together. Not to say that the other offensive coaches aren't, or the defensive coaches, but I think there's probably, when you've been an offensive coordinator like Tony Elliott was at Clemson for a decade, there's probably a closeness to your offensive coordinator, as in Des. And Dez has caught a lot of heat, as has Tony. A lot of people pinned last year's offensive woes and some of this year's offensive problems on Dez. So he's been open to criticism, and he has obviously seen the criticism that Tony Elliott has had, and Tony hasn't. Well, he may have had it impact him, but he's kept it to himself. He's always smiling when we see him at any meetings we have with him, and a positive attitude. And Dez mentioned that after the game, that Tony had been through so much, maybe more so than anybody coaching today, from the events of last November's tragedy, and for him to be able to get the team through that and his coaching staff through that and himself through that, and to never give up and to keep encouraging the team and telling them that you saw a clip last night of Tony before the Carolina game greeting each player as they came out of the tunnel and saying, "Hey, this is what you dream of. This is why we're here. This is why you play football. Never give up. Get your game face on." He was encouraging. You can't say enough about him and these other coaches for keeping a positive attitude and keeping these kids inspired, because it could have easily gone the other way.
They showed highlights during the game and post-game on television of Coach Elliott interacting with the players on the sidelines and before the contest. And everything you just said is very well spoken. He has faced so much adversity and crossfire, but in the warm-ups, he's high-fiving his players. He's got the biggest smile on his face, and he was able to manage that adversity by putting on a face of, let's go out and have fun. He may have the weight of the world on his shoulders, but that energy was not conveyed to the roster. And that's a sign of a fantastic coach, to be able to either code switch or manage stress the right way where it's not conveyed to the players. I think you gave a quote last week about Deion Sanders, and it was like a head coach may be feeling something, but the general on the sidelines is never rattled because the players can feel that energy.
Exactly. And they believe me, those kids pay attention to their coaches, and they can detect if there's a weakness or a lack of belief or anything like that. And how many times have we seen it around the country where a coach will get rattled and
throw his headset,
be losing his mind on the sidelines when things don't go right, and it reflects back to the team. They begin to lose their cool. They get shaken. They lose their confidence. Tony Elliott's not like that. I mean, he's had his moments when he was frustrated, because for a while there it seems like every break went against him, and some questionable calls, I think, at times this year that's hurt them.
That's fair.
There's been some frustration, certainly, but and the fact that some of his own players were their own worst enemies at times, and I think that was one of the big points of emphasis during the bye week. And Des talked about this at length, and Tony did too, is that they spent a lot of that time just explaining to the kids that, hey, if we stop these dumb penalties, if we stop making mistakes, if we stop helping the other team in crucial situations, we're not that far away. We've been close, and we've killed ourselves with losing our cool and punching a guy after the whistle or doing
NC
something.
State?
Yeah, doing just...
Was it 4 turnovers in the fourth quarter for Calandri against Maryland?
Yeah.
The NC State...
3 straight possessions, yeah.
3 straight possessions. NC State, hate to use names when it's college players. They're not pro players. You got an offensive guard punching somebody after a touchdown. You got a helmet removal that gives better field position. I mean, I know hindsight's 20/20, and in big-time college football, there are no moral victories, but Kevin Higgins did make the point. They were in a lot of ball games.
They had double-digit leads in 3 games and lost.
Right. Double-digit leads in 3 games and lost. So this season could have been very different. Kevin Yancey, he likes to play the bear. He says, sorry, you can scheme up for UNC, but not JMU or Boston College. I mean, we understand your points there, Kevin. But at the same time, this team has got a brand new head coach and still is trying to work its way through a different system. Multiple folks are saying that while Tony Elliott has saved his job, in fact, this is coming in from 3 different Facebook pages here. I'll paraphrase from 3 of them. Thomas, I'll read yours, and 2 others are echoing what you're saying. While he certainly has saved his job, and I was one of those folks that was calling for his removal, and now I have to, as Hootie said, eat some crow, I do think there should be some coaching staff changes to this football team. You agree with that?
I think it's premature at this point to do that. Let's play out the season and see what happens.
And I think he's alluding to assistants here.
I'm sure he is, and you know that's something that Tony Elliott's probably looking at from an evaluation standpoint of whether he needs to make any adjustments in that department. Scheming up for JMU, I think Virginia would like to play that game. They like to have a mulligan against JMU, I believe,
And NC State.
and NC State. But you know, as good as JMU is, had that storm not come about, I don't think JMU would have won that football.
100%.
Virginia had them on their heels.
The storm changed the entire momentum and outcome.
And credit to JMU. They used that to their advantage and outcoached Virginia the final 12 minutes of that game. But had that storm not come about, Virginia would have maybe have won that thing going away. So,
I mean, you talk NC State.
I'm not trying to take anything away from JMU,
Sure.
but you got to be real here.
You talk NC State and a mulligan. NC State, they lost by 3 points, and the offensive guard and the backup quarterback contributing to penalties that led to that outcome.
Yeah.
With Brennan Armstrong driving the field. Brennan Armstrong, interestingly, has seen some better days in Raleigh. That's a side note. Boston College, a 27-24 loss to the Eagles. I mean, they're in you can make a legitimate argument that if things had changed differently, they'd be on a 4-game winning streak right now heading into Miami.
It's conceivable, yes.
Very
no question
conceivable.
about it.
This has been a question for you from multiple people. So who's the best team in the conference? And we highlighted it as the best and the rest for Hootie. It's got to be Florida State,
well,
right?
it is Florida State. I mean, they're undefeated. They're 7-0. They've had some moments where they didn't look as solid as you would expect a top 5 team to be. But there's no question they have the personnel on that team that they have a roster that's the envy of everybody in the league. Clemson used to have that kind of a roster. They've dropped off a bit, and I mean, whoever thought we'd see Clemson at 2-3 in the conference? If you said that a couple of years ago, you would think something disastrous had happened there instead of in Charlottesville. But Florida State, without a question, is the best team in the league. I thought North Carolina might be able to rival them because Carolina has a lot of playmakers, but their defense obviously isn't as good as we thought it was, and Drake May can be beaten. They didn't have their heads on right, and if they want to finish and play Florida State and Charlotte for the ACC title, they're going to have to get their heads on right. And I'm sure Mack Brown, being the Hall of Fame coach he is, will use this to his advantage because now he has their attention. If you talk to any coach, there's nothing to get his players' attention more than a loss, because then all of a sudden, hey, maybe he was right. Maybe we didn't listen to him enough. We need to pay closer attention. And so I'm sure he'll use that to his advantage. Louisville's tied with Carolina at 3-1 for second place. And they're, like I said, they're stuck out there in the West.
West of the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear that much about them. You see them on TV from time to time, but They've got some players, and they've got a good coaching staff. They've got a great fan base. Yeah, are they as good as advertised? I don't know. They've looked shaky at times, but then they turn around and beat Notre Dame at home, and that game, it was never in doubt in the second half. I didn't think. Duke is 2-1 in the league, along with Virginia Tech. Tech really hasn't played the meat of their schedule yet, I don't think, in terms of the better teams in the conference. Duke is sort of a question mark. They beat Clemson early, but it's not looking quite as flashy and shiny now as it did the opening weekend of the season because Klubnik, the Clemson quarterback, hasn't been everything that we thought he was. And Clemson hasn't been everything we thought they were going to be either. So Duke is solid. They're a good football team, don't get me wrong, but there's more to be told in that case. So right now I think it's Florida State hands down over anybody else.
If you had a crystal ball, Florida State, who in the ACC championship? You sticking to UNC?
I still think it's UNC.
Me too.
If they can get their act together, if they can learn from this loss, which they should.
The reason I think
they still have to play Duke,
right?
But again, we don't know if Duke is as good as advertised either.
The reason I think it's UNC, I think the addition of Trez Walker makes them even more explosive on offense and dynamic. And I don't think we've truly seen Trez Walker assimilated into this offense to the proficiency or efficiency that he will be at the end of the year.
I think you're right.
And I think May now has some bulletin board material himself where he's going to look to rebound and really show the scouts that this was an anomaly and not indicative of his NFL upside. And I think May has got a tremendous NFL future ahead of him. So we're both thinking of North Carolina, Florida State, ACC championship as of now. This question's come on the feed. Jonathan, we appreciate you watching. I believe this is the third straight show he's commented on. He says, where do the wins come for the rest of the year for UVA football?
Well, I said that we've said all along that I thought they had really good shots here against Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech. I still believe that.
Me too.
Georgia Tech, they're developing as they go, but I think the fact that that game is here, Virginia has had their number. I don't think, I may be wrong about this, but I don't think Georgia Tech has won here since 1990. So they have a little phobia about coming to Charlottesville.
One of the greatest comebacks I've ever seen was the hook and ladder against the Ramblin' Wreck.
That's right.
Scott Stadium.
Mike Groh called that play. I'll never forget.
Alvin Pierman.
To Alvin Pierman. And, Virginia Tech at the end of the year, Virginia Tech seems to take this rivalry more seriously than Virginia. You got to question whether it is really a rivalry because it's so lopsided as opposed to the Virginia-North Carolina thing where Virginia's won 5 of the last 7. But I would think those two are strong possibilities. It's going to be tough at Miami, even though Virginia's got some momentum going its way. You're playing down in South Florida, but they've always seemed to give Miami a good close game. Even there's a couple times in the last 5 years they should have won at Miami. They just couldn't score. And I don't know that that'll be the case this Saturday or not. And I think Virginia has enough confidence now, and if this offensive line can continue to punch holes in the defense, they'll find ways to score down in Hard Rock Stadium. But it's going to be tough out at Louisville. Again, they could sneak up on everybody and end up in the ACC championship game because nobody's counting on them. And then I think the game here against Duke, I think Virginia's got a good chance of winning that game if they can continue to build off of this win and get better and develop the running game. I think the whole key to it for the rest of the season is if they can continue to run the football successfully. Because if you can do that, you
Takes
can
the pressure off of Muskett.
You can, yeah, absolutely, and it helps his play action. It helps his nakeds and bootlegs.
Yeah.
It opens up a whole new world of offense
Right.
if you can run the football consistently.
I mean, Muskett may not have the upside to be a quarterback that the team can ride his shoulders and his arm to the winner's circle, but Muskett has clearly shown that he has the skill set to be a game manager.
Yes.
And if they get a run and attack, a rush and attack like they did against UNC, then Muskett is now going to have a safety that's in the box to stop the run, which is going to open up opportunities downfield. He's going to have a front seven, a front eight that's going to be playing rush, which is going to open up the screen. It's going to allow him, like Hootie said, to get outside the pocket and throw on the run without a big boy in his face. I mean, it's clear they were committed to the run here. Jennifer Hux is watching the program, and she says the hook and ladder, also known as the Emery and Henry play. Watching the program right there.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. I learned something every day. We both did right there from our fantastic viewers and listeners. My friend, we are at the 11:23-minute marker. Time flies as we're having fun. We want to talk hoops. ACC Basketball Media Day is tomorrow in Charlotte. The Virginia Sports Hall of Famer Jerry Hootie Ratcliffe will be there in Charlotte. What are you going to be watching of ACC Basketball Media Day tomorrow?
Yeah, my son Scott and I will both be there.
First, where are you going for food? The really tough question. Because you got all the good eateries, Hootie, on the ACC trail.
Well, you know, I don't know if you've been to this thing, but it's different than some other media events because you're in a hotel room.
Okay.
You get there at 8:30 or 9:30 in the morning. Register. They have a breakfast buffet, and then they have a lunch buffet. But other than that, you're in those meeting rooms from the time you get there until it's time to leave. You eat there in the facility.
Okay.
And so there's no excess time to be burned. You're talking to. They're going to have 15 coaches and 30 to 40 players there, rotating throughout the day. And the way they do it, they have a big auditorium, and each team will come in for 15 or 20 minutes. The coach will get about 10 minutes for questions, players 5 minutes each to the general audience. Then comes that part is okay, but my favorite part is that then they go into a breakout room where you got Tony Bennett at one table. You'll have
you got to imagine Reese
Beekman at another table and Ryan Dunn at another table, and you'll have them for used to be an hour, but I think Tony's complained about us having to sit there and talk that long. So I think it's 30 minutes, maybe a little more than 30 minutes now, where you can just sit there and with whoever you want to talk to, or you can rotate and ask your questions or listen to questions or whatever. So you get a good feel for what's going on with the program. And you do that with 15 different coaches. It's going to be interesting to see what next year is going to be like with 18 coaches and God knows how many players down there when the 3 new teams come in.
Sounds like you're going to be
they
there.
may have to split it up over 2 days instead of just one day.
I was going to say.
It's one of the longest days of your life because you, at some point, you just get overload.
But you get a lot of sound.
You do. So,
the question, where the Who's going to be picked in the preseason? Tony Bennett's got a loaded roster. Does the media pick the Who's in the top 1, 2, or 3 slots?
Possibly third. I think
Okay.
I think the media will probably vote, and some of this because of where it's at. It's in Charlotte, so there's going to be more media from the North Carolina areas there to vote. Terry Holland once said this. He said, to win any ACC honors as a player or to win anything in the ACC vote as a team, you've got to be twice as good as North Carolina and Duke or whoever because you got to convince people outside of North Carolina to vote for you. But I imagine Duke and Carolina will probably be voted 1-2. That third spot will probably be up between Miami and UVA, would be my guess. And then it'll be a scramble after that. But I imagine those will be your top four.
This basketball team, absolutely loaded. We covered this last week, but I'm seeing the questions here on the comment feeds from the viewers and listeners. They're saying, what's the starting five looking like for you? We did cover this last week. The show archived, guys, everywhere you get your social media. We said Beekman and McNeely.
Yeah, I think that will be your two backcourt guys. And then
we talked Dunn
and
Leon Bond.
Leon Bond, and I think they'll start out at least with Jordan Minor,
the 6'8", 242-pound bruiser,
as a center, and that they can move a lot of bodies in and out of there with Blake Buchanan. Even though he's a freshman, he's 6'10". He's a stretch 4, even though he's a big guy. But I think Tony is not opposed to playing a lot of the smaller lineups as we saw last year, and I think college basketball is probably trending that way to where you don't need a 7'2" guy in the middle all the time.
So is the NBA.
Yeah, NBA as well, and that's drifted down to college basketball. So I think Tony likes the fact that he has 4 guys, sometimes 5 guys that can handle the ball, can shoot, can move, and can play defense, and you can still rebound that way. You might find it difficult if you run into a really big opponent who's also athletic, like they did against Carolina a couple of times in the last couple of years, and some of the other teams like that. But I think he's more concerned about getting the ball in the basket, and I think he has enough shooters around now that we're going to see a lot of bodies playing from early on. I think he'll play 9, 10, 11 guys in November, at least in some of the powder puff games, rent-a-victim games, just to see what the chemistry is and what lineups work together.
I love it, guys. Basketball right around the season, right around the corner. This team is loaded. I think the future is bright. This man's website is the place for anything UVA related. The URL, jerryratcliffe.com. I'm on jerryratcliffe.com every single day, multiple times a day. Was it Tarleton State to open the season on the first Monday, the Monday before Election Day, so that would be the 6th of November.
I think that's correct.
They got Tarleton State. So we got basketball literally 13 days away, Hootie.
Be here before you know it.
13 days away. This man's schedule, press conference today, Scott Stadium.
No, it's over at JPJ, actually.
JPJ.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then you're going Media Day in Charlotte, Wednesday. You back Thursday?
Yeah.
Back Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
You're a busy man.
This is the time of year that's
the overlap.
That really ages sports writers.
That's what I'm going to say.
The overlap. Novembers are brutal.
Overlap right now, especially when you got a basketball team like UVA that is very bright with its upside. My friend, this is a joy. Time flies when you're having fun. Any closing thoughts for your fans?
We appreciate your viewership of this show and appreciate you visiting our website and listening to our podcasts. We'll have some of those this week, and thank you for your questions. I listen to other talk shows sometimes around the country, and sometimes they get some really dumb questions. Our audience is intelligent, man. They ask really good, thoughtful questions, and you're smart, and we appreciate that.
Well said. Well said. We give props as well. Both of us do to Judah Wickhauer, the man behind the technology.
Man.
The glue man. The Elmers over there, Judah Wickhauer. This is the Jerry and Jerry Show. Find it anywhere you get your social media. Tuesdays at 10:15 in the morning. Thank you kindly for joining us. JerryRatcliffe.com for anything Wahoo related. The I Love Seville show is up in approximately 59 minutes. Thank you kindly for joining us on a Tuesday, and go Wahoos. Take care, everyone. That was awesome. He's going to tell us when the